We'll get you some. There's some water there.
Good morning, guys. How's everybody doing?
Good morning.
So this is like the first time I've really shared in an environment like this. I've shared my story quite a few times, but what I'm feeling here as I come in this morning is I keep hearing that verse where it says, "Our spirit bears witness with His spirit," and I'm just recognizing the Spirit of God that's in this place and how it's different in every church, and how awesome that is to realize that we all connect differently. Everybody's story is different. We all have a different journey, but it's the same Spirit. And when we come together in a place like this, I just want to honor you guys for having me. I feel God's presence here, and more than being nervous, I'm just overwhelmed by the presence of God in this place. I feel like first year, I feel like I kind of have a word I feel like I want to share with Roy. I felt it when I first shook his hand, and this is kind of what I heard in my heart. I heard God say the posture of your heart has never changed in the journey that you've been on. And I just feel like He wants to honor you and what you've been through and all the different places you've gone and what you came out of, that the posture of your heart hasn't changed, and that He recognizes that and wants to honor that in you.
Thank you.
So that song we were singing, Amazing Grace, when we were singing that song, I just kept thinking about how often we complicate the gospel. And our life gets so wrapped up in what's going on, and who said this, and you know, they hurt me, and you know, I just feel like God so many times has called me back to just the simplicity of it. Just to say, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Like, there is so much we learn in our journey, but if we can just keep it simple, there's times in our life we just got to keep it simple. We got to go back to what worked. We got to go back to the original thing that we know that's going to get us out, and just that's it. Like, keep it simple. And so I just felt like I was supposed to share that amazing grace. Sometimes just go back to that amazing grace, and that's all we really need. And then maybe one more thing before I share my story. I'm just going to be sharing my story, kind of how it happened and some of the things that I went through, and then maybe a little bit on how, you know, some of the things that I feel like keep me, you know, connected to where I need to go, and some of the things that have worked for me, and some of the things that have meant a lot, some of the scriptures have meant a lot to me. But I haven't spoken in a place like this, but I have a lot of addicts and ex-addicts, a lot of people that message me and I have contact with. And one thing that stands out to me, I'm just going to read, is Romans 8, 8:30. Let's see here. Where is it? It says, Romans 8:37, "No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us." And God wants us to be more than just overcoming, okay? In addiction, we get sober. There's a term they use, it's called a dry drunk, okay? And that's it. They just conquer the disease. We just overcome our anxiety. We just fight to survive. But God is saying we are more than conquerors, man. He wants us to live abundantly, and there is so much more. And from my experience and what I've been through, if I don't learn how to live to be more than a conqueror, then I fall back into my old habits. That's been my experience. And so that's the thing that keeps me thankful about my past, and that I'm not embarrassed, or I'm working on that, to be open and be able to share my past, is because that is what has empowering me to live more, to not just be satisfied with okay, but I want God's best for my life. And you have to have that mindset that we are more than conquerors, or you'll never fight for that.
Yeah.
So, my name is Jason David Miller. I'm 38 years old, born August 14th, 1979 in West Branch, Michigan. come from a big family. Mom and Dad had 13 kids. There were 6 of us boys, 7 girls. And am I too close?
You're fine.
Fine.
You're fine.
I moved to Indiana when I was 8 months old, so I grew up in southern Indiana in a New Order community. Where we grew up in the community, it was not, I don't know how the Amish are around here, but we did not party. We did not, there was no hands courtship. There was, we were very, we were fairly modern Amish. So a lot of the ones where I'm at now, we just feel like how I grew up was very different than that. And my dad had moved there from Middlefield, Ohio. They grew up in a culture where it wasn't really like that. They partied a lot, and the kids were kind of expected to go through the Rumspringa times. And Dad didn't want to raise his family like that, so he moved early on after he had just, I think there was like 4 or 5 kids, and he moved down there and was really trying to change the culture that a lot of those people had instilled in their kids. And early on, I recognized that the dad had always wanted something better. He wasn't willing to just say that we're just going to do the normal. He was never normal things that everybody does. He always kind of, in that culture, you talk about kicking against he was always riding the fence kind of thing, and not in a modern way, but in his own way. And my point is, that instilled something in me. It instilled something in me that okay, and what everybody else is doing is not good enough. There's a better way. And I even remember saying when I was still Amish, I would say, I'd make the statement, and I don't think I knew what I was saying, but I would say, there's got to be a better way. And I was saved. I was going to church, and there's got to be more. I knew it in my heart, but I just didn't know how to connect to it. I didn't know what it was, but I was always really hungry for more. So we moved a couple times. At one point, when I was 10 years old, in 1989, we moved to Everett, Michigan. That's how we know the Hirschbergers. We moved out just a couple months before they moved in, but I knew the house they moved into, and that's the first contact there. So we lived there for 4 years, and I guess I felt like Dad was, there was a lot, we were kind of a modern Amish, and in a sense, the change that was coming with that community that we lived in for 10 years was, I felt like Dad kind of went back to the old order. He maybe a little more stable, maybe a little more like, my kids are going to not run out, and I can't speak for him, but not do. He was trying to do the best thing he knew for his family. So we lived there for 4 years, and I hated it. I didn't like living there. Most of the kids didn't, and we got out of there in 1993 of December. 4 years later, we moved back to Indiana, where I grew up, and I wanted to be back there. My friends were there. I was 14 years old, moved back there, and as about that time that I really started to feel like I saw cracks and flaws in the religious theology or whatever they were teaching. Like they would, some of you guys from that background, you kind of know, people ask me, why did you leave the Amish? And my first response is the word hypocrite. And they're not all, I'm not saying that. It's not about, but I was one of those people that even later in life I would find myself not saying things because I was afraid I couldn't do them. So I was not going to speak anything that I couldn't keep my word, because I'd seen it for so long, people saying we want to do this and be this and we are this, but then I knew what was going on behind closed doors, and I made a vow that I would never be like that. And I'm going to connect to that a little bit later in my story, and how actually making a vow to something that we really can't always control is actually a horrible thing to do.
Yes.
And I've realized it actually fairly lately in my life, how some of the things that I didn't understand why I had this struggle, and I was praying through it, and God would bring that up, that I had made a vow about that thing. And but anyway, I'll try to get to that later. So I got saved when we were back there a couple of years, and I think I was 16 or 17 when I got saved. I'll never forget it. It was kind of interesting. Sometimes it's hard for me to share this because I hear other people's stories of how they were saved and how it changed their life, and the power of Jesus came in, and it wasn't like that for me. I was staying the night at a friend's house. My pastor, his son, were staying at their house. They were going, and my buddy Joe was there, and he strong-armed me into praying a prayer. And, with threats of what was going to happen, where I'd go if I died that night. And that set something in my heart about the type of ministry I believe God's calling me. I think it goes back to that point, and God used that in my life later to love people without trying to get them to do something or say a prayer. Okay, yeah, we want to save people and get them to heaven, but that's not the basis of the ministry, okay? Yes. It is love, and that's the only thing that's going to motivate anyone to change. Condemnation is never going to do it. Fear-based religion and fear-based behavioral modification will not last. Amen. And there's no value in it, even if you can strong-arm someone into doing it. And so the next day after I got saved was one of the worst days of my young life. I remember the condemnation that came over me. I kept thinking that something's wrong with me. I can't think like this. I can't feel like this. This can't be how it's supposed to happen. This great big, I'm getting saved, going to heaven, and I feel like total garbage. And so that was the beginning of my journey, with what I knew at giving my life to God. So over the next couple of years, I knew something wasn't right. And I really started seeking, though. I really did. I knew that I wanted to live my life for God. I wanted to do the right thing. And I felt like everything around me was trying to take me down a road that I didn't want to go. The whole culture was steering me. By the time I was 17 or 18, all my friends had joined the church. And I was trying to join the church. I wanted to fit in my head, but I think something deeper within me wouldn't let me fit in. Not blaming it on anything, but I tried to join the church, I think, 2 different times. It was the 3rd time before they what we do is you go through it's like a 6-week course where every Sunday you meet with the preachers, and they talk to you, and they talk to your family and how you're doing. And they want to make sure you're a good little boy before you join the church. And I wasn't a good little boy, so I didn't get to join the church. So I think it was like the 3rd time when we finally, I did what was necessary. I was almost 19 years old. I think it was just before I turned 19 that summer. And I told them I'd do whatever it takes, like you living in that culture and everybody 2 or 3 years younger than you is a member of the church and you're not, and it is a constant thing. I remember laying on my bed at night, feeling like this black sheep that, and I knew in my heart I was on a good journey. I wasn't trying to party or be a bad guy, but because this is what the culture said about me, I had to wear that to a degree, and I wasn't able to separate. I didn't have enough truth to separate where I was going, where God was calling me, from what the culture was telling me I was. So I went through some really difficult meetings there, meeting with one of the preachers every 2 or 3 nights a week. It was a horrible experience, and ended up, I joined the church, and that didn't help, at all. I was looking for something, and that did absolutely nothing for me. In fact, it almost made me angrier that I had finally worked so hard to do the things that they told me to do, and I still had absolutely no peace in my heart. And there was something in me that was just, and I'm coming back to this because my dad's here and I want to honor him this. There was something in what he did when he stepped out of Middlefield, away from that culture, that set something in each one of our kids' heart. If his kids are, every one of us kids has something that is drawing us to a better place. We will not settle for second best. And if you have people in your life that you guys are close to, you have the ability and the opportunity to do something now and to make a change, and it will affect future generations. You're not going to see it tomorrow. You don't see it right away. But that's the seed that gets planted in the ground, and the roots are deeper than the plant itself. Yes. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yes.
And so I had this thing, and I connected it to a pretty deep level. I remember, one of the last things before I left the Amish was I was trying to have Bible studies at my house. I was connecting to some of these what they call charity churches. I don't know how many know what that is. It's like, it was kind of like, in the New Order circle, it was kind of cool, to hang out with the charity people. They were modern, and they had supposedly had the Holy Spirit, and they understood the gospel, and they weren't tied down like a lot of the Amish people. What we saw, that was my perception of it. So I started connecting. I started getting some truth. My sister married a guy from Libby, Montana. They had been to a meeting and been filled with the Holy Spirit, and they were, all this cool stuff, and I was starting to be around it. Just enough to keep me going and keep me searching. And so when I wanted to hold Bible studies, I remember one of the guys came to me and he said, it's really impressive that you want, you're going after God and you want to have Bible studies, but you can't do that without an adult with you. And I just remember when he left that night, it was it. I was done. I was leaving. I was trying to find truth. I was trying to get away from the people not even leave the community, just step away far enough, and with my friends that I trusted, read the Bible and say, what does God say about this? And they said I couldn't do that. And so that was it. And I made up my mind to leave, and it wasn't too long before I traded my horse for a car, and literally, and and I was gone. So I really left with good intentions. I left with every intention to find truth. I even thought I might, at one point, join the charity church, or I wanted to kind of stay conservative to a degree in my heart. I guess I had seen so much in that culture that I did not think that, I didn't think that what they had shown me, there could be any value in it. And so I was willing to leave almost everything behind. I wasn't trying to really be that conservative, but I didn't want to party. I didn't want to go just be wild and crazy. And somebody, one guy talked to me, and I wasn't excommunicated right away. There was a 7 month period when I left. And in that time, I was spoken to several times. They wrote a lot of letters to me, and they always encouraged me to get to find a church, and that was my heart, was to find a church. Excuse me. So, but as time went on, and I tried other churches, and I went to other places, and Mennonites, and at one point there was a Holderman Mennonite church close by there. And if anybody knows anything about the Holdermans, but they're the only ones, supposedly, that was my belief about what they were. My belief was that's what they believed, and that was attractive to me. Because at this point, I didn't think the Amish wasn't it. I had seen enough that I was going to sweep it behind me, and I was willing to join, do anything. So the charity and the Holdermans and I went to mega churches, and it seemed like in every one of those churches, when I got in there and found the inner workings of some of those big places that, in a lot of ways, I guess I felt a lot of it was the same. And there was a lot of good people in a lot of those places. And God was in a lot of those places. But the community that I longed for, and what I was seeking for in my heart, and maybe part of it was my journey where God's taking me, because those places are definitely not all bad places, bad people, or bad churches. It was just that I kept seeing, I was really sensitive to this one area of religion and people that said they was going to do this, and then they was doing something else behind closed doors, and I would see that, and I would run, and I would, want no part of it. So about 7 or 8 months into, after I left the Amish, they came to my house with an letter, and they excommunicated me. I had to separate myself from my family because I couldn't handle the pain they were going through. My sister told me later some of the things that her husband was one of the ministers and had to help write that letter. And so I had separated myself from my family far enough by that time that I was just kind of staying away from it. And when that happened, when they excommunicated me and I was already building that separation from my close family and friends, it was kind of a turning point for me. It was slow, and I'm telling you that You don't wake up one morning in a bad place. It doesn't happen overnight, just like something good doesn't happen overnight. You don't just make a mistake. I mean, you can rob a bank and go to jail, but for the most part, you don't make a mistake and end up in a bad place. It's a series of choices. And that's what started happening when I look back over my journey, is I started making a series of choices that were largely dictated by what I had seen and what I hated so bad that I was walking away to get away from that. The choices that I was making weren't right, and I knew that, but that was less important to me than being connected to that old thing that I had learned to hate so much. Mm. And so I started it was a slow process, and I would still go to church, every other week, and then once a month, and it just got slower and slower, and I started partying harder and harder. I think I always had this idea that if I could go to college and live the American dream and have a good job and make a lot of money, that I would find maybe that's where it was at. As much as I wanted God in my life, I felt like I had tried it and I didn't understand why I missed it. So I went to shortly, maybe the first year and a half after that, I went to a little technical college for a couple of years, and I had 8th grade education. So I didn't know algebra. I barely got my GED. Public speaking, I took my public speaking class, and like halfway through it, I couldn't, I dropped out, man. I wasn't anything that I felt like was in the cards for me. I just didn't I didn't want to be part of that. I was like, no, this is just not for me, college. So I left, and I started running out of options. I feel like what happened for me. I found a good job as a contractor. My dad had a window business. We did windows for years, and then I got out of that, and I was a cable contractor. I made really good money. I bought a big house in a nice subdivision, and I started to stabilize my life for a little bit. This was in 2006, 5 or 6, I want to say, when I bought my house there in Salem, Indiana. It's where I grew up. I kind of felt like I was home, and I wanted to stay there. I was kind of proud of the fact that I stayed there, because most people that leave the Amish, they just kind of jet, and they're just like gone. They don't want no part of it, and I was stubborn, and I said, I'm going to stay right here, and they're not going to make me move. I'm going to live my life. And so I did that. I'll go back and say this. During that first year of leaving, all of my friends got cut from me. They tried to, hang around. They went to the movies with me once. One of my buddies even drove my truck and ended up getting pulled over, and it scared him so bad he quit hanging out with me. But the pressure from their community. And, before I knew it, the only people I had left to hang out with were the kids from the high school team, football team that I could connect to because they were younger, and the people at the bars. So my friends list was, I have some good friends, a couple guys I'm thinking of right now that were there from the beginning that were really good people that I would never want to say this about. But most of my friends were so shady and such bad examples for me that they pulled me into this road. They didn't even know it was the culture that was there. So now I went from one culture to the next, and I, unawares of what I was getting myself into. So anyway, I got into this, I moved into this house, and I owned the house for like 6 or 7 years and made pretty good money the whole time I was doing it. And I felt like the longer I stayed and the more established I got, the more restless I got. I wasn't going to church at all anymore at this point. My conversations about God were, when I get married and have kids, I'll come back to church. I didn't want to do it before because I did not think that I could live my life how God wanted me to live it, and it was still, you have to do to be. If I don't do something, then I am nothing. Mm-hmm. And I've realized since, and I might go into this a little later, how it's been the most powerful thing in my life today is that it's exactly the opposite. I can do because I am because of what He says I am. Because God has justified us and made us righteous, and nothing that we do can make us that way. It says faith without works is dead, but that's not where it starts. It doesn't start there. And so I had a pretty long-term relationship at that point, and I was ended up really going south and going really bad. And I had a next-door neighbor. It was kind of in a rich neighborhood. And so the next-door neighbor's dad owned a big business, had lots of money. He was just pretty much a neighbor kid that didn't work. Took money from his dad. Found out later he was robbing people, basically, and he was real bad into drugs. And honestly, I didn't know anything about drugs. I didn't know the word addiction existed. I just didn't know what it meant. And I messed around with it a little bit. I drank, partied, but sometimes I go back and it's just the ignorance of something, and it that took me down that road that first time. But my point that I want to make is that sometimes what we don't know is going to kill us. Like, man, my people perish for lack of knowledge, man. We need to be educated. I'm not saying you want to go out there and know everything about everything that's going on in the world. You don't need to know all the garbage. But you need to know a little. You need to be aware of what's going on. You need to know what's happening around the corner, enough to know if there's something coming, and anyway, so that was not our culture that we were taught. We were taught that you don't drive a car because the car could take you to a bad place. So you just avoided everything bad, and that's how you saved the day. And so when you got guys like me that ran from that, there was no protection, and I didn't understand boundaries in any way, shape, or form. And throughout my addiction and relapse is the thing that, I think the number one thing that would take me down every time was that I didn't understand boundaries. And I didn't know how to put them in place. And I hated boundaries. And I basically made a commitment that I wouldn't have boundaries, because everything that I saw with boundaries created drama, and it didn't take you anywhere anyway. If I could have seen my friends that had boundaries in their life that actually made them happy, then I wouldn't have felt like that. But because they were shaped by behavior modification and not an inside heart understanding of what God had done for them and who they were first, then I might have not thought like that. But my whole thing was that if it was just really skewed. So, never forget the day I'm standing on my back porch, my house in Salem, and my girlfriend, I just found out she was cheating on me, and my neighbor came over, and he said, "I got something for you that'll make you feel better." And my first thought was, nothing would make me feel better right now. I was so caught up in a 4-year relationship, and I felt like I was putting her through nursing college, and I was so invested, and I was at that point so trying to do the right thing that I didn't think anything could make me feel better. Basically, took me, went into the house, and I got high, pain pills, and that was that thing right there where that's where the hope got in, because it made me feel better. Wow, I couldn't believe it. It literally just took it away. And the point that I want to make is that timing is everything, man. There is a time in your life where you're going to face something bad. I don't care how good your life is, and if you're not prepared and you can't step back from it in situation, if you get caught up in it, and you can look back all you want and say it was timing, the worst case scenario, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when it happened. It just mattered that it happened and I wasn't ready for it. We can't prepare for everything in life. That's not my point. But, man, the devil knows when to come in with timing. And even in my life right now, I can tell where I'm doing good and things are going well and I think everything's rosy. And then all of a sudden, and I don't even recognize it until I look back and I'm like, wow, that was such crazy word that comes to mind is demonic timing. Like, it was so inspired by the enemy to come in right then at my weakest moment. It's like it couldn't have been changed. And so that was my real start with addiction. I want to say it was 2009, probably June or July of 2009. And it was slow again. It was pretty slow. I didn't know, I didn't understand very well. I still would have talked about addicts as just kind of garbage and just a bad person. I would never do that, And basically, again, making vows to myself that I would never do that. I would never use in the morning. I would never use on weekends. And then it got worse, and it just kept, If you don't make a change in your life early on, you gotta, the way I would compare it for me, I went to rehab. I went to treatment. I went to 7 different treatment centers. But early on in your life, early on in a problem as it starts to build, if you can recognize it and step away from it early on and start making good habits, if you don't, it's a hard road to hoe to get out of it. I mean, it gets deeper in there, and it's why it's so important to have good people in your life, people that can be there to bring you back and to guide you and to say, hey, don't do this, and to listen to others and to listen to counsel is so important. And I had cut everyone like that out of my life at that point because of what I felt like, where I felt like they were going to take me. I wasn't just, I was just not in that place at all where I was going to listen to any counsel. But so I'm going to fast forward here a little bit, and it was about 2 years, I think, that it took for me to really know that I was addicted. That was almost 2 years, maybe 18 months. I had a lot of money. I never went without, so I didn't even know I was addicted. Like, you don't know you're addicted until you run out, and then you detox, and that's like the world's worst thing. But first time it happened, I was out of state, and wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. And I got, the desperation of it. I was going to come home on the train, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. And you make a way, and in that mindset, and this is where more bad habits started for me. It's where I first robbed somebody. I got into a house, and I make excuses, whatever, but I went in looking for pain pills. So I started going through people's houses, waiting until they weren't home, trying to find their meds, and that was a habit that I started. And later on, it wasn't about that anymore. It was a whole different story. But that started a really bad thing for me. Went back home. Ended up within a month or two of getting home, losing my job. Kind of quit, kind of lost, but it was definitely because of the use that things got worse. Progressively, just kept getting worse and worse. I didn't know how to stop the spiral that I was on. I started recognizing probably in about 2011 or something like that. I started recognizing the spiral that was happening in my life. Everything was just kind of falling apart. After I lost my job, I moved out of my house. I was dating another girl at the time. I moved in with her this is in January of 2012, and I was addicted at the time. I know a lot of my story, and if any of you seen my video, a lot of times I'm not completely honest or raw or real about what really happened. It's easy for me to blame the tornado experience for my addiction, but that's just not really how it happened. Obviously got way worse, but in March of 2012, I was not living in my house. I still owned my house. I couldn't sell it. I had lost my job. The other jobs that I was doing was barely, getting me through, and I was spending every cent on dope, partying, bad place. I remember, many nights on the phone with Mom and my sisters and just didn't know what to do, didn't know how I was going to get out of this situation. Realizing how addicted and how deep that stuff had gotten into me and how hard it was going to be to get away from it. And I just didn't think I had what it took. I really didn't believe I did. And so March 2nd of 2012, this is when the tornado story happened. And, I stayed home from work that day. I think I was supposed to be watching my girlfriend's son, and she, basically said, no, I'll take them to the babysitters, you just take care of yourself. And, I often thank God for that. But stayed at home that day. In the afternoon, we knew a tornado was coming through. And I was sitting in the living room at 2 o'clock drinking. Drunk, actually. I don't even know if my family knows this. But, no, it was just my escape. I had to have something. I didn't have any money, waiting on a paycheck. And anyway, I went outside, saw the weather. Okay, so the story goes, the weather people had said the tornado was going to miss me. It was 25 miles south and west of me. It wasn't coming our way. So I turned, kind of walked away from the TV, was picking up some beer bottles or something, and walked outside 15 minutes after I last saw the news. And I looked out the door, and it was right there. I mean, it was coming right at me. Probably 300 yards away, coming over a hill. I could just see a solid wall of debris coming at me. It didn't look like a tornado, like a cloud. It looked like a train coming sideways. Just all the debris is all I could see. It kind of panicked. I ran. As soon as I saw it, I heard my neighbors screaming. And I had my neighbor, my friend Joe, Mariah, and I had 3 children. And I didn't know him real well. We don't live there for about 2 months. But I had just talked to him the week before, and he was going to go to work for me. We were starting to work for the state of Indiana doing some renovations. So I knew him fairly well, and his girlfriend was standing out in the yard, and she was screaming, holding the baby car seat. So my reaction was, they live in a trailer. I've been hearing on the news, don't stay in a trailer. So I ran over there. I grabbed the family, brought them into the house. And, it was on top of us. And I remember putting them in the hallway and putting pillows down there. And I was like, it's going to be okay. And they're screaming. And I was fairly calm through this. I don't know where that came from. But I found often that in extreme pressure situations, I am actually better than I am in normal life. And I had a prophetic word from someone recently that said, you fight so much better with your back against the wall. And just realizing that has been powerful in my life, to know some of us are like that. Maybe all of us to a degree. That's not the worst place in the world to be. You don't want to fight with your back against the wall all the time. But when your back's there, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Like some of us are really good there. There's some boxers that were the best off the ropes. And it's just an analogy that, it's not... anyway, I went, opened the door to see where it was at, and the tornado was coming, and made it back and landed on top of them and was praying, and that's the last thing I really remember. The house got hit squarely, got sucked up. I remember the whole house coming up off the foundation. It started to spin. I remember feeling the rotation of the house. It didn't come apart. We were so squarely in the eye of the tornado that what's in the middle, there is no oxygen in the middle of a tornado. So when it came over the house and it sucked the house up, the windows blew, and I remember thinking glass is going to hit me, and I didn't feel anything. And later I realized that it blew out. It sucked everything out, so the glass flew outwards. And it sucked the oxygen out of the air, and we all blacked out. I know I did. And that's often been helpful for me because as the story goes, the rest of the people, everyone was killed in that tornado except for me. I woke up at one point, just a flash, and I felt like God gave me that flash to say from the situation I was in, He used a tornado, and so many things in life are like that. There's these literal and spiritual applications in our life that we can look back and see how God uses it. But He sucked me up out of my situation and let me open my eyes a couple hundred feet in the air, literally see the funnel and see down to the ground, and then obviously it was a miraculous. I got thrown almost a half a mile, landed in a field. I had 14 broken bones. I tried to walk back to the house. I didn't remember that. Someone else had came up to me. I had amnesia for a while, and it's just a crazy story, how I survived that, how I could land, and obviously there's angels there, and God's hand was just miraculous stories. I have, I think, like 7 different stories of where I should have been killed since I was, a baby, where I had horrible accidents, and I'm going to go back right now real quick. When I was 16, we got a house fire, and my sister Julia's here. She got burnt really bad. Me and her were really burnt really bad. And then my older brother Johnny and Elizabeth, they were burnt really bad. So there's 4 of us kids who were burnt really bad, life flighted. And I probably shouldn't have got out of the house. I had one lung collapse and the other one almost collapsed. I'm a hard sleeper, and I didn't wake up in time to, I don't know what woke me up. I just woke up and the house was filled with so much smoke. They said normally you would never wake up from that. You'd just die in smoke inhalation if you get that much smoke and your lungs are as bad as mine were. So I had a lot of times where, I can look at that now and realize that the true purpose for my life, there really is a bigger purpose. And there is for each one of us. Everybody's story is different, but each one of us has been called according to his purpose. And when we find that and walk in that, we start to go look back in our life and to realize all those times where God saved us. I don't care if it was just getting pulled over when you were doing something you shouldn't have been, or whatever, or a car that almost hit you, or, man, we've all got those things in our life that I believe God wants to show us what didn't happen to us. So after the tornado, I didn't work. I broke my left arm in 7 places. I broke my collarbone, my shoulder blade. I broke 5 ribs and my back in 2 places. And so I couldn't walk, I couldn't work, I couldn't do nothing for over a year. And they got me on all the meds I thought I wanted. I mean, at one point, after 8 months after the first surgery, they did another surgery on my arm because it didn't heal. I had a dual break in my arm. The center bone never healed, so we went back to another surgery. And I remember specifically, before I went, I was like, I'm going to get this certain kind of med. If I have that, I would be better. I was 8 months in and I was extremely depressed. I was on good, meds, pain meds, depression, anxiety, sleep meds, and it was getting worse. And I was spiraling mentally, emotionally, laying in the hospital bed. I remember a guy from Oklahoma called me. He said, I saw you on the news, and I have a story almost like yours, and I want to tell you that what you're about to face, you're going to need some help. And they wrote down his number. I couldn't find his number later, but I just completely ignored that, like absolutely not. And then later on, as this thing started to happening to me and my mental state started to fall apart, I was fighting that this whole time. Like, this is not going to happen. This is not. I put it this way. I think we hear statements sometimes and they stick in our minds. And I would hear the statement, take life by the horns. Okay? And I was thinking how I was going to fight this thing was by taking it by the horns and controlling it. And I was going to force myself. See, up until the addiction, I was one of the most disciplined, strongest people I knew. In fact, in my group of friends, this is not bragging, but I might have been the most disciplined person in my group of friends. I had that culture underneath my belt, and I knew that it took discipline to get places, and in areas of my life, I should say, I was very disciplined. But when it came to that, and after the tornado and the mental and emotional breakdown I started to feel, man, I couldn't even get a grasp on how to fight that thing. So anyway, at that last surgery, I got this pain med, and they gave me exactly what I wanted. And I remember having a bottle of 140, 240 of those things. And I would run out. It would be 3 days before my refill, then 4 days, and then a week. And then it got to where I was running out 2 full weeks before my refill was up. With everything that I wanted, I thought I wanted. And I remember specific instances in my mind thinking, wow, if this isn't going to work, what is going to work? I was in such a bad emotional place that trying to connect to God, and I run into this a lot of times when I'm talking to people that are going through these hard things. And I know what to tell them. I know what they should do. But I know that when I was there, I couldn't do it. I didn't understand the basis, and I think is what's important for us, the family and friends, to have people in addiction, or if you have people, or you're struggling with depression or anxiety, or I was having panic attacks, that you can't just tell somebody what to do, because a lot of times they don't have the ability to do that. I just didn't know. In the certain areas of my life, I knew what I should be doing, but I didn't know how to do it. And and I'll just be honest, I don't have all the answers on how all that works for everybody. When I talk to people, I just really try to feel like what God's telling me and share my story. This is what helped me. This is what got me out of it. For me, unfortunately, I had hit rock bottom. And that was really the solid foundation that I rebuilt my life on. But it doesn't have to be like that. It really doesn't. If you have people in your life that really care about you and speak into your life, and you can trust them, just listen to what some of these things are that people are suggesting. In AA, they talk about take suggestions from other people. And that grinded me from early on in addiction. Take someone's suggestions. It doesn't mean you have to do exactly what they're telling you. It doesn't mean that they're always right and you're wrong. It's not about that, but try something different. And I wasn't willing to do that. I'm going to speed through like the next couple. So let's see here. The second surgery was in October of 2012, and then 2013 and 2014, my addiction got really bad. I was starting, I'm trying to remember, I don't know exactly how it went, but I know when the doctors cut me off from my meds in late 2012, early 2013, I knew I needed something else, and I started really, searching for, I went to some courses, a course called Take Back Your Life, I was going to Celebrate Recovery things, anything I could find, but, my part of the journey is just, I didn't seem to really connect to anything at that point. I wasn't done. I wasn't done. I enjoyed it too much. I really did, as miserable as it was. And so the next 2 or 3 years, man, I got to where I didn't enjoy it at all. Nothing about what I was doing did I enjoy, but these hooks of addiction were so deep in my mind that I almost couldn't, if I wasn't feeling good, I couldn't keep from stealing your tools so that I could go get high. I just couldn't. When I say couldn't, I want you to hear me right on that. What I had in me at the moment, I didn't have enough to stop myself from it. Mm-hmm. And so when I grew up, how I grew up, and I thought I had morals, more than most people, I thought. And then suddenly I'm stealing from my own family. I think what that did mentally and emotionally to me was when I really went over the edge. It got really bad. I started getting pulled over, getting charges, hanging out at dope houses, hanging out just crazy stories things that happened that didn't scare me enough to make me quit. And so I don't understand why that was. Some of those things happen like that. But again, for me, it had to be rock bottom. That was the only way that my stubbornness was going to let go and realize that I'm not. It's not okay who I am. It's not okay how I'm acting. That my actions did get me here. It's not just bad luck. It's not just a tornado. My girlfriend cheated on me. That didn't have anything to do with it. It was me. It was my life. And I was here, and nothing else was going to change that. And I had to figure out a way out of that. I started, this is where my treatment journey starts, was in August of 2015. I went to a detox facility in Warren, Ohio. I was there for 6 days. I got out. I got high the first night. My mind said it wasn't heroin. That was my addiction. That's what I was addicted to. It wasn't heroin, so I was all right. But it all leads back there. And I had a week or so that I was good. But I had changed. Nothing had changed in me. It was behavior modification. I was sober and I was miserable. And I didn't connect. I didn't do the right things. They just seemed too hard. It didn't seem worth it. I thought I was going to be okay. December of 2015, my parents finally found a treatment center in Seattle, Washington. It was a horse ranch where people, the horse therapy was supposed to keep people sober. They were willing to try anything. They were just about to send me to Arizona, where you hiked for 56 days right through the detox. They were that desperate, That was terrifying. I remember speaking to the guy, he's like, yeah, we just hiked the detox right out of you. I was like, oh, I'm not going there. Sleeping in tents on sleeping bags anyway. So I went to Seattle, was out there. It was very expensive. Was not a state run. I had no insurance, very expensive place. Went out there for 35 days and got sober. And I think it was 2015, and I was in the best mental place that I had been almost ever, I think. After my first 35 days of being sober, I was in a really good place. I was not in a Christian facility. I was going to church with some people, but I found God out there. I was a long ways from home, and I was forced to. I had no choice in the matter. I wasn't, and most of us, I think, are people that we can't just sit down and give up. We don't know how to give up. We talk about don't give up. What does that even mean? I mean, how do you give up? What does that mean? We all have a fighting spirit in us. We just have to learn how to connect to it and how do we fight and what works for us. But I would get crazy, just do whatever to get out of this place. I went 8 days without sleeping. I remember on the 7th day out there, I went for a run. It was Seattle, Washington. It's rainy. It's 34 degrees. It rained every day I was there. I did not like it. I went for a run at one point down along the river, and it was raining so hard that it started to flood while I was back on this trail. And I remember probably at least a mile. I kept going, and the end of the water was over my ankles, halfway to my knees, and then I had to run a mile and a half back. 34 degrees, pouring rain, and screaming as loud as I could at the top of my lungs for as long as I could keep my breath. Just to try to awake something within me that was going to connect to something this was not ever going to happen again. People would say, don't forget the pain, remember the pain, don't forget where you came from, never forget this. 35 days later, I went to Montana. I stayed with my sister, my brother was here, he was there with me, and we both got sober. We were there for a month, and we came back home, and I had this obsessive thing that I could use one more time. And, I thought, what I was hoping was that if I used one more time, and it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, then I would never want to use. And that's a crack. All that is a crack in the door, and the devil don't need no more than that. He just needs a seed, a tiny little thing, to stick his finger in, and I promise you, he's got a big foot, man. He'll wedge his foot in there if you let him. And that's exactly what I did. We ended up using pretty soon after I got back. And again, it was a real slow process. I justified it. I would go a couple days not using, and I got right back into it. 2016, I went... all right, we'll get 2016... Let's see, I went to Cincinnati to a place called Hope Over Heroin, April, May, June, a little over almost 3 months. 3 months sober, went through the awfulest detox again. I didn't sleep for 12 days, didn't sleep for 9 days, I think it was out there. And at this point, when I'm going to these treatment centers, which mentioned I was not on heroin, I was on a doctor's prescribed Suboxone or Subutex. And anybody's watching that's on that, I'm sorry, but that stuff's worse than heroin. It really is. It gets in your bones, it gets in you deeper, and I wouldn't want my kids on it. I'd want my kids on anything before I want them on that. That's just my personal opinion of what it did to me and what I see it justifying in people's minds of how it affects you. And I justified it all through my treatment centers. But there's a better way, and we don't have to. We are more than conquerors. We don't just overcome the addiction. We overcome what caused it.
Yes.
So, came back, was sober for 2 or 3 weeks, was again in a really good place, and I knew I had it. Mom and Dad actually came and got me out early, and they thought it was the right thing to do. The place down there turned into there was a lot of, my religious radars are really high a lot of times, and I feel like I can smell it a mile away, and I run and I react faster than I should. I know that. It's like the one thing where it's easy for me to jump to the other side of the ditch, and that place was a Christian rehab, and what was going on, a lot of things, it was a great place, a lot of things going on there I didn't think I could handle, and I talked my family out of letting me out early. And I guess I'm not really, thought I might say something about that. If people have people in treatment or about getting them out early, that's often a big deal. Should they come out of treatment early? Are they okay because they're doing great like I was? And I don't think anybody can really answer that question for anybody. I think generally speaking, if you have a habit that has been taking you more than 2 or 3 years to develop, you are not going to separate yourself from that habit in 90 days. It's not going to happen. You need more than 90 days to to separate from the habit, but then you have to build good habits. Because what are you going to do now that you don't have the old habits? What's going to happen to all that dead space? My mind was consumed with using how I was going to get there and how I was going to kill the pain at all costs. I was such a loud voice in my head that said, kill the pain at all costs, that I spent my entire day brainstorming on how I was going to do that. So when I took that away, now suddenly I am kind of like an empty house. What am I going to fill it with? And my experience of God had been a 911 call. I didn't understand. I didn't keep it simple. Like I said earlier in the beginning, I had complicated this thing to think that I needed. I guess I didn't know what I needed for sure. I just didn't think that. To me, my experience with God had been such a 911 call experience and my personality partly, but I would also like to say I think we are created to not really be able to live that way. We can't live to the fullness of what God's calling us to if we're half in and half out, 1 foot on the fence. The devil owns the fence. That's why he talks about if you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth, because that's almost the worst place to be. You've got to be done with it. And that's where I had to get in that rock bottom. So I was in Cincinnati, came back out used. I was relapsed. I went to, that was it actually. That summer I had a couple months there where things got really, really bad. I had trucks repoed. I was getting arrested, getting pulled over with drugs. Miracles. Like one point, I got pulled over with a lot of other drugs other than heroin, and the cops literally let my mom come pick me up. I mean, I don't know how it happened to this day, but later on in treatment, I'll mention this in case I forget, the people were telling me, you're in treatment, they're going to look favorably on this that you're in treatment. I was like, yeah, right, this is a felony, and it was a lot, and no way this is going to happen. And I walked in there, and they dropped it all to a misdemeanor without even me trying. An absolute miracle. With my record, I had shoplifting and a bunch of other stuff that was on my record at the time. Driving without a license, a bunch. Didn't have a truck, didn't have a driver's license. Had lost my vehicle, had lost jobs, had lost a place to stay. The bottom came for me in October of 2016. A friend of mine from church said I could come stay at his house. I got there, him and his wife got into it about it, and he took me to the homeless shelter. And that was rock bottom for me. All that stuff I'd been through, nothing felt like somebody from your own church taking you to the homeless shelter and dropping you off with 200 men that you'd never met. Had to shower with half of them together, and it was terrifying. I wasn't supposed to have my phone where I slept. I remember sneaking my phone in and talking to Mom, and I told Mom I'll do anything. I don't care. I will do anything. My thing was I always fought long-term rehab. I said anything over 90 days was too much, and I wasn't going to have it in me to do it, so I fought it. And I feel like I realized later, looking back, that the enemy knows where your breakthrough lies. He knows what you're good at and where your breakthrough lies, and he'll let you go to church all day, read the Bible, do anything you want, but he won't let you get close to that breakthrough point. And if you feel like in life you're facing that wall that's always right there, that's probably the one that's going to get you there.
Yeah.
That's probably the wall that is really your Jesus coming on the waters on the other side of that wall. But we let fear cloud us so much. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was reading a story where Jesus was coming to the disciples and they were on the boat. And they thought he was a ghost or the devil. They didn't even recognize Jesus. Because of their own fear, they couldn't recognize Jesus walking on the water. And man, was that true in my life. My fear of that thing, I could not recognize that is what I really needed to do. And I had such deep habits that that's where I had to go. So I went to Southern Ohio, a place called New Beginnings. Freedom Hall is the name of the rehab, and the church is called New Beginnings in Piketon, Ohio, not too far from Chillicothe. We got in there. I actually had a spot reserved. I was in another treatment center, and the 2 months before I got into that treatment center, I got kicked out of 3 rehabs. Just crazy stories. It's almost like, God doesn't want anything evil to happen to us. Not in any way, but he'll use it. He'll figure out a way to use it. And it guided me to that place, and that place was an absolute godsend. The lady that ran it had been through addiction. She had been to prison. She was a nurse for stealing meds from the patients, and she understood us. She knew what we were going through, and she had the guts to be firm with us. And that's the problem that a lot of families have, is they don't have the guts to be firm with the people and know just what needs to be done.
Amen.
Because empathy is huge, and we need empathy, and we need sympathy and understanding. We want that. We want to do that. But the right balance, man, with that is so important. And I think that's one of the big things right now with addiction and families, is that they just don't know. I know my family just really tried to be balanced in that. And it got to a point where they just didn't know. Everything they seemed to do and help me when they thought it was right, pulling me out of the rehab in Cincinnati, when I was in I had a relationship with God where I was hearing God like I had never heard God. I mean, it was incredible what I was walking in. But, so, what is the right thing to do? But that's different for everybody. But anyway, so I got down to this place, and 7 months I stayed there. I remember about four weeks in. This time I didn't sleep for 12 days. I don't think I slept a wink. Miserable. I remember sitting on the front porch, crying, telling God, somebody asked me one time, they said, "Can I pray for you?" And I said, "Why would I let you pray for me? God doesn't care about my withdrawals." That was the one thing that I always ran into, that I felt like was there. It was a consequence from my actions. It was going to happen every time, no matter what I did, how hard I prayed, or how many times I went to church, who I talked to, counselors. That was always there, and it was never enough to keep me from going back. It wasn't enough. But today, I use that. I use that in a powerful way today to not go back. To remember where I came from. Fear is not a motivator, but if you've been there and you remember that pain and you can use that, for me, I got out of the religion into the grace message to the degree that fear and condemnation and stuff is evil, it's all from the devil, and absolutely it is. But I was to the point to where I didn't allow myself to use anything to help me, and it actually hurt me. So today I use a lot of the memory of where I came from and remembering that pain to keep me from going back there. And it really helps balance and stabilize my life, and it's not a negative in any way. There's no fear involved in it. I just remember where I came from. And so 7 months in, I graduated from there, and I got out, and it was really good. It was July 17th of last year, and I've been sober for 7 months. I got out, and God worked miracle after miracle, getting me a vehicle. Someone gave me a vehicle, getting me an apartment, getting me a job. A guy got out of the Army that needed to work. I had the experience. He had the truck, and we got together. And we're still working together today. It's just been really amazing how that worked out. But I'm gonna just touch a little bit. So that's my main story. I want to touch just a little bit on this last winter and what happened and why I think it happened. What happened? This is the part that I haven't really talked about yet. If I'm honest, I'm only a little over 3 months completely sober, because I had a relapse this last winter. In October, days started getting short, and by November, I was getting nervous, I was getting scared. My home groups in church, I wasn't sure I just wasn't sure. I didn't feel like I was getting what I needed from them anymore. My journey had gotten me to this place, and I filled books like this, of journals, of things that God spoke to me, of things I could use. I started reading and writing, and I'd never done either one. So I did something different, and it worked for me. I started getting on a fitness journey where I started getting healthy and working out at the gym, and it worked for me. It did something to me physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, where it helped me pull out of that place and keep me on a good road. But it didn't. My point that I want to make is, what gets you out of your mess doesn't always keep you on that road. We have got to grow. You cannot do the same thing you did 10 years ago and grow. It doesn't work that way. You can't do the same thing you did last year, probably not even in business. and most certainly not for most of us. We have to learn how to grow and adapt, and especially if you've been through extremely difficult things like that. I wrote something down here that I want to, and the guy up beginning here, he mentioned this about the worshipers going out in front of the Israelites. And I was reading this the other day, and it was just so powerful. And I felt like God brought it up and showed me that's what happened. When you come out of that kind of darkness and you get into your own place, you have your own job, your own car, the relief and what you feel is incredible, but that doesn't carry you. And the thankfulness that I felt was incredible. But that's the one thing I can put a finger on and say I let that slip, and that is, I can't say exactly what it was. This is last winter, but I feel like that's where I lost the victory. Is I didn't keep the worship out in front of me to clear the way. What is the stance of our heart after God gives us victory? After something good happens? After all that stuff's behind us, are we going to forget it and just go on down the road and slowly the newness wears off? It's like the new truck smell. When it's gone, the payment's still there. Do you know that you can... God's not going to take you where you can't give you more than you can handle. I felt like in treatment last year I heard God say that I will never take you somewhere that your character can't keep you. And I started to really believe that. But my heart of thankfulness started to really wane last winter, and I really just started to get lax on everything, and I was like, I'm sober a year, I'm good, I got this. And I let my guard down, and almost immediately circumstances arose with my brother, another brother of mine, some things that came up, and before I knew it, I was back in it, And then the terrifying thing of not again, but I was able to come to some groups at church and just blurt it out and just say, hey, I relapsed. One of the ladies there, one of the groups said, what's relapse? It's not funny. But it was amazing, like when people came up to me, and it's that confess your faults one to another so you may be healed. And it's the reason that today I've committed to living my life out loud, to be vulnerable, to share with people what's going on. What I did, I stole money from my sister when I was in addiction. I stole expensive tools from my brothers, and I'm not ashamed of that. I am the act. But the fact of it is that the fact that I can look at that and say that's in the past and move past it is the only thing that's important at this time, because I can never go back and change it. I can apologize, repay. Other than that, we can do nothing. And our life is like that. We've got to go forward. And if your worship doesn't go out in front of you, I really believe from my experience, you will not keep walking in it if you lose your heart of worship.
Yeah.
It was very important for where I've been and all those things. And what keeps me today is to keep that heart. So that's pretty much my story. I have a few things, if you just give me just a second here, that I wrote down, but that's most of my story and where I'm today. How I got sober this last time was to come out and just, no matter how brutal the embarrassment was, to just gut it out and just say, yeah, this is where I'm at. And it's empowering to be able to do that. Who cares if it's embarrassing? Do you want to go back to where you came from? Do you want to get out of where you're going? How bad do you want it? Would you do anything? Who cares what people think? It's not about them. This is your life. That's what I started to realize. This is my life. This is about me and where I'm going. And I knew that God had a calling on my life. I've always felt like there was protection on me. I've had prophetic words about, protection on my life and guardian angels, and obviously my life has shown that. And I'm back in this place in February of desperation, and I was willing to do whatever it takes. And before, I wasn't. And I think we all have to get to that place sometime. When it really gets bad, you've got to be willing to do whatever it takes. There is no shame. That's the first thing the enemy's going to try to keep, is shame. That's the first thing that came in the garden, was shame. When Adam and Eve sinned, the first thing they did is hid. They didn't even know they were naked. They were still hiding. It's just that first thing the enemy throws on you, boom. As soon as you do something wrong, we duck our heads, and that's the first place we want to run. And when we recognize, I say that to say, when you recognize that, and you see that shame building up in you, I don't care what it's about, you fight against that thing. You do not succumb to that shame and that guilt, because that's where the enemy is going to take you to get you down that road of isolation and hiding and not telling people, having this false layer of who you really are. It's kind of, one of the things how I grew up. I hated that so bad. And that had become me. The exact thing that I hated that had become who I was. That vow that I made that I would never do this, and now I was stuck in doing it worse than ever, and I didn't even realize it until after it had happened. And so today in my life, I really try to not make vows and say, I will never do this. I try to say, by the grace of God, that this thing is behind me. I'm moving forward, and it's not about I will never. There's no value in that. The value is in today that I'm going to do this. Each day, one day at a time, one moment at a time, if that's what it takes. Because when you're first sober, a lot of times it's 1 minute at a time. It really is. In the last part of this journey, one thing I'm really realizing on a lot of this stuff, and I hope I can do this, but a friend of mine's here today that has been through terrible addiction too, and he's sober. He had a miracle recently. I just feel like, could we give him a hand? Aiden, can you stand up, man? Can we give him a hand? Appreciate that, and I just wanted to bring that up because it means so much to me that he's come out of this place. He's been in a horrible place too, and God has just done an amazing miracle in his life. But one thing we talked about on the phone yesterday, and it made me think of this story with Elijah and Elisha. I'm almost done here. Elijah and Elisha. When Elijah found Elisha, and he threw his mantle on him, and he wanted to go back and say goodbye to his mom and dad. And he wanted to go back to that village. Go back. Maybe the people would talk him out of it. Whatever. He wanted to go back. He said, I will. I'll do it. But just let me go back to mom and dad and say bye. And at the end of that story, he's like, they burned the plows and they killed the oxen, man. And you got to burn the plows in your life. If you got something that's been holding you back. We talked about that. What we were talking about was phone numbers, people, connections, all those things, whatever it is, you got to put it behind you and do whatever it takes. Don't give yourself that crack in the door. And Aiden's doing that. I'm really proud of him. I'm going to close, I think, with I think it's Romans 8 again. That's just something that's really spoke to me, man. At the end of Romans 8, we probably all know it. We read it probably all the time. Where I just read about more than conquerors. But how do we do that? And talking about worship going out in front of you and letting that be the posture of our heart, that we're thankful for what God has done for us and we don't forget what he did for us. And sometimes it's just that simple. 35, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness, or danger, or sword. And a lot of us could say, can drugs, or anxiety, or depression, or a death in the family, or a job loss, what is it that has been that for us? For your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors throughout him who loved us. For I am convinced, in this journey, the last part of this that I want to make is that it has allowed me, the pain that I went through, has allowed me to find a connection to the love of God like I have never been able to. I can come in this place and feel it here this morning. I can sense it on people. I have a sensitivity to it that a lot of people don't. And I just say that to say, if you're going through hell, there's something good that can come out of it. You can take something with it. It doesn't have to just, that's not the end of your story. It's a messy middle, and God's going to bring you out of it, and we're more than conquerors. And it doesn't matter what happened to you in the past. We're convinced neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, either height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And that's the powerful thing that keeps me going every day right there. Thank you, guys.